Hello everyone and welcome to another Expert Voice. My name is Lucy Challenger. I'm the CEO of Polo and Tweed and I am joined today by the amazing Kay Bennett. Kay, hello, how are you?
Hi Lucy, thank you very much for inviting me on.
You're very welcome. Now, Kay, for those tuning in and listening to us today, is an incredible interior designer. And Kay has worked around the world with incredible properties and venues, creating amazing imagination to reality projects. So, Kay, I thought perhaps you could introduce yourself to everyone, tell us a little bit about your amazing career and the type of work you do.
Thank you. Well, to be honest, my career, it got off to a little bit of a false start, which was interesting, but perhaps also the making of me. So I went to a fairly academic school and followed in the footsteps of a fairly academic sister who had won a place at Cambridge and was very settled there, etc. So when I turned around and announced at school that I was planning to go to art college, there was a sort of a stunned silence. And then I was basically told that I wasn't, and that would be a lovely hobby, and I should definitely enjoy that. And I should go back to the end of the queue with my UCAS book at the time and come up with something far different to that. So that's sort of what I did. So, or in fact, that's exactly what I did. So I then ended up, I was fortunate, I got good exam results, got into the university of my choosing, etc. But basically to do a course that I wasn't interested in. So I stayed for a little bit. I did do a term and a bit. I spoke to my course tutors. I was doing quite well. So there was a certain lack of understanding as to why I would then alter this course. And then I made the, at the time, terrifying decision to leave university and go and pursue what I wanted to do, which was to go to art college. So I actually left without even telling my parents because I knew what the conversation would go like. And so I left and sort of snuck back to Edinburgh, which was my hometown, without saying anything, got myself a job as a nanny at the time while I kind of decided how that was going to work from there on. And then sure enough, kind of went ahead and I applied to get on an art foundation course, which bridges the gap between your sort of formal training you would have had at school and into the areas of design. And it gives you a taster basically of the different design disciplines, which was fascinating. And definitely broadened, you know, what my options were at art college, because I was perhaps a little one-dimensional before and thought I would go and study painting, you know. So I learned a lot more about the courses on offer, and definitely, I mean, interior design was definitely where I was going to go. So following that, I then went on and began my kind of formal design training. So yeah, that was my interesting start.
Wow. And so now, bringing us now to the front of your career, what sort of projects would you typically work on? What sort of a day in a life for Kay?
Well, they're quite diverse. One of my specialist areas is period properties and mansion houses, which are obviously incredibly interesting. My background is history of art and architecture, or I have a strong background in that, and it's something I'm really interested in is architecture. So getting to see, you know, this country is not short of these properties, and getting to see inside a lot of them is really wonderful. And learning how to modernize or keep these properties relevant for modern living, I find really fascinating, because you don't want to rob from their past. You want to take all of that and really just be able to subtly add modern luxuries, you know, what we expect in life nowadays. And I find the sensitive approach to that is an area of my career that I've always really loved. So that's a very interesting part. I also work commercially, so working on apartment blocks in London that are being done up to rent, you know, as always adding value to such places. So they're either being sold on or rented out, etc. So that's also very interesting. And then I have my sort of quirky projects, which I really like as well. At the moment, I've just been working on a shipping container conversion for a colleague and dear friend of mine who's got very stuck in this homeschool. So he's trying to run his business from home for the first time, and has two very lively boys in the house. So he decided he needed to be out of the house. So we've done this incredible conversion and made this sort of purpose-built space, converted space for him. That also, as presumably situations change, he can then use to rent out as an Airbnb or as a little guest house or all sorts. So,
Okay. Oh,
so
wow.
yeah, my projects are diverse.
So how do you, what do you do without giving away, you know, your top secrets and trade secrets, but how do you start a new project? Because obviously if you're working in a period, you know, mansion through to a modern apartment, they're completely different properties. They're potentially at completely different stages of interior. So what do you do to begin that process with a new client?
Yeah, so I think I've very much learned to see that every job is a complete new learning experience. I think there was a point in my career when I used to think, when I've learned all of this, then I'll be better, or I'll be this, or I will just have my list and I'll know exactly. And if anything, that's what I've learned, is that you never finish your learning, and you shouldn't want to. And that each new job really is a new experience. So I don't tend to look at whether it's a modern building or a period property particularly. I think probably the way I work is the same. So crucially, listening to the client, definitely. Listening to what the client wants is going to be your very starting point, and then getting into the space. So definitely, from my point of view, light is going to play a huge part in any project. It doesn't matter what it is, what size, what era, doesn't matter at all. For me, I have to physically be in the space. I have to feel what it's like. I have to look around. It's also very helpful to see the client in their space, particularly if it's a domestic interior, commercial as well, because you need to hear what they are looking to achieve. What outcome do they want?
Mm-hmm.
You know, is this a forever home that you're working on, or is this a property that's being turned to make money very quickly? You know, so this all comes into play. So it's gathering all that information, I think,
Okay.
which is essential, again, no matter what size the project is, and then going from there.
No, absolutely. I mean, it's interesting about hearing what you said earlier about, you know, sort of the raised eyebrows around the family dinner when you told your family that this is the path you wanted to go on. And I can empathize with that, because I come from both my parents are doctors. They imagined me going on this career path, and throughout my life I've set up multiple companies, and of course now Polo and Tweed. It's definitely not the path they imagined for me. And I think a lot of people going into creative or own businesses have that pressure from perhaps, you know, senior family members that are more used to the path well trodden. When you say, hey, I'm going down a different path, and everyone sort of goes, oh my gosh, what's happening? So that leads me to my next question, which is, if someone's listening to this and thinking, I would love to do what you do, you talk about education, talk about training, but how can they get into it? What would be the best approach for them to do now?
Definitely the route to take at the moment is the degree route. I mean, absolutely. So you're applying to art college and you're doing the degree course. There's other online learning platforms, obviously, particularly at the moment. Other courses that you can do that are not to degree level. So there's other ways around it. But I think, in my opinion, at the moment, that would be that's you coming out with your best qualifications to then enter the profession, definitely. Yeah. From a sort of tips point of view, I think, so I'm asked fairly frequently if I can take on work placement students, which I'm a fan of from my own experience. And I can't often take many students on, but I'm always quite keen to talk to people and certainly have them ask me anything they want about my experience in this industry, because my sort of number one thing would be, and I know it sounds obvious, but really research what interior design is, because I think there's a bit of a false opinion that it's a very glamorous sort of picking wallpapers and drapes, and it's not. It's most definitely the art and science of enhancing an interior space. And you know, the technical side is big. Your CAD skills have to be tip top, and that's something you're going to have to constantly refresh. So you need to be interested in it, I think. Sketch work, absolutely, as well, because I'm a big fan of hand sketch work. However, you have to have the digital side of that. That's absolutely essential. Yeah. I think also knowing a bit about the history of design and art and architecture, I would say, is really important. You're just, in my opinion, you will understand what's in front of you much easier if you have a background knowledge of that. And also, it's a really beautiful part of the job and, you know, the profession. And it perhaps makes you more literate to have that understanding behind you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, I think it's interesting because, someone might not be in a position yet to go and do a 3-year degree or whatever, but especially in the Western world, although not right at the moment because we're in lockdown, but we're so blessed that we can access so many National Trust properties and museums and historic venues around the world to be able to actually see. And I remember going to visit Windsor Castle and just looking around these incredible beautiful rooms, steeped in history. And you don't have to do a 3-year degree, you can just literally jump on a train and go and visit these places to have that inspiration. So do you draw a lot? You obviously talk about your passion with history and understanding about that side of things, but do you draw on that with all your projects, regardless of the space? You're looking at the space and then obviously using your own knowledge and educational background.
Yeah, I would say I am, because yeah, I would say that's part of my thought process. I'm always aware of it. So if I'm working in a period property, then obviously I'm aware of the architectural era and what comes into play. And for me, there can be certain delights in that as well. If you certain periods that we have moved through, as things have come in and out of fashion, there's been a lot of architectural features that were considered to be vulgar and were covered or hidden, etc. So I can sometimes appear a bit like a magician when I can see that something has been covered up, that perhaps people can have lived in a house for many years and not know it's there, or else they have just bought one of these houses. I have a couple in Singapore who recently invested in a very beautiful mansion house in Scotland, because they want their children to come back here and have some connection to Scotland, because they were born overseas. And this house had last been done up in the 1950s, which for me is wonderful because it's a Georgian property. Now that for me is just incredible because it hasn't really had an awful lot. It was maybe touched again slightly in the 70s. So I can go into these properties and I can see things that will have been covered up. So we can really, really strip things back. And people are amazed that I haven't actually done anything but perhaps moved some plasterboard or, uncovered some railings off some fantastic fireplaces, but you tend to know that they're there. Wow. So that sort of thing, if you didn't have a history of art and architecture, you might uncover them anyway, but sort of knowing when you walk into a building that the bare bones might well be under there. Sadly, sometimes they've been removed anyway. Depends what the history of the house has been, what its story is, which is always fascinating as well. But yeah, I think that's good. I think you see it differently if you know what the architectural period was, if you know why it was built the way it was. The building makes more sense, I think. So that's bound to come into other things with me, because I look at practically why a building is put together the way it is. So that must play a part in any contemporary buildings that I work on too.
Absolutely. Well, my imagination now, I'm just thinking sort of hidden rooms behind wallpaper and, all sorts. So, are there any other unusual stories or even funny stories you can share with us that you've experienced in your time? Because now my imagination's creating a whole
yeah, goodness, all sorts. There's often the projects I work on are remote, so particularly if they are period properties like that, or I work on some properties in France, etc. So you can't be there all the time babysitting, so that there are always things that are therefore challenges that are thrown at you if things are perhaps misinterpreted when you're not there or such. So yeah, I've definitely had situations where we've perhaps had a room painted in Hague blue, to use one example, which is a very rich navy blue. Made famous by the Dutch painters, obviously, when it was supposed to be borrowed light on that occasion, which is a baby blue, beautiful baby blue, and I get lovely pictures sent at the end of the day by my teams who are there, and I have to sort of go, okay, so we're going to start with white over the navy to go back to where we were. So there's definitely situations like that, because you can't be everywhere at once. So yes, definitely some funny ones. I suppose the main one or biggest learning curve of my career perhaps was, anybody who's ever moved house will be able to relate to this one, that you always have to think about the furniture you're taking into your new property and make sure it fits, which obviously is a fairly basic prerequisite in my job. So this particular property, I think we were furnishing a number of flats, so you have a particular day when all your Arctic lorries arrive with all this furniture, and these are the days you just have to get through them. You have to get everybody moving everything into the building, and then you can sort of gather yourself from there. So the last thing we had to bring into the building were 10 double wardrobes, which were sitting on the pavement. And this was in central London. So obviously you have to have permission. You have to be very nice to the neighbours for this terrible intrusion, etc. And I had indeed measured the wardrobes and the turning spaces, but after a few minutes, the guys came out and they were like, these do not go. And I'm saying, no, they do. Of course they do. I've measured everything. So with wardrobes, you can normally remove either the cornice or the plinth.
Okay.
And on this occasion, they were molded, so they did not come off. And so we had this sort of, I don't know, it was probably about an hour while we all scratched our heads and walked around. And I'm generally quite outwardly calm, but inwardly I was certainly not at this point, walking up and down the street trying to decide what to do. And actually it was one of my team who's fantastic. And what we ended up doing was removing the doors and actually cutting the wardrobes vertically in half, taking them in and then rejoining them and battening them back together.
Oh my gosh.
So yeah, that was quite some learning curve for me. As I say, every day is a school day. You never stop learning. There's always a way.
Well, no, and even more so now, I assume, with the fact that, we're back in lockdown, lost track of how many we're in, especially for you being based up in Scotland. You've had much more extended lockdowns than we have down here. And COVID has changed everything, because we're expected to do things remotely, and you talk about earlier how light being a major aspect of your process and your craft, and if you can't go to the place to see the light, then that must have an impact. So how have you found this COVID situation? What have you done to adjust, and what do you do now to deal with it?
Yeah, so you're right, we've had extended lockdowns in Scotland. The first one was the most severe, and so I think like everybody, you were not allowed to go for work. So that there was so that was very difficult for me. As it happened, most of my contracts at the time were sitting in the hospitality industry, which I hadn't particularly recognized that that's where they all were. There were obvious ones that I was working on, 2 restaurants and a bar at the time, but the other ones were actually mansion houses. But as a lot of these large houses do nowadays, they look for other ways for income. So 2 of them were wedding venues. So of course these businesses were shut overnight and really have not really been able to open yet. Yes, yeah. So that was really dramatic. And the week prior to lockdown, which I know was a difficult week for so many people, really the vast majority of my contracts stopped at that point, which was alarming. And really hard for the people that I work with, because I'm very fortunate, and the majority of my work is word of mouth, and my clients come back to me, which is really lovely. So I know a number of these people very well. So it was really hard to watch people thrown into this period of confusion, and nobody really knew what was going to happen. And as you say, here we are a year on. So at the moment, I'm still legally allowed to move for work. So I do what I can from home, but I am fortunate that I am allowed to go to a property. So I either go on my own or with one other person, and we socially distance and are careful about the process. Sure. You'll understand, having looked at who can and can't go to work, I have to scrutinize the information. So at the moment, I'm still allowed to travel. Yeah. It's slightly worrying about what might happen if I wasn't again, although I don't think it would be an extended amount of time. So I think perhaps we just have to work through it if that's what happens. Yeah, so at the moment it's okay.
And how have you found, because obviously, like you mentioned with your clients in hospitality, and literally overnight everything stopped, and still has pretty much within the wedding industry, etc. But people have faced financial difficulties, they face mental health challenges. How do you get through every day? What do you put in place, for you and your family? What gets you through each day and sort of rising to face the challenge the next day?
Similar to you, I'm homeschooling, which is certainly a challenge. And I think we're probably looking at that going on for some time, or that's how I prefer to manage how I look at that. Yeah. My children are pretty resilient. They're well aware that I run my own business, and I've always put that forward as something I'm very proud of, but that it requires family support. Yeah. So my daughter, who's 11, is very keen to help me design. So that's really nice. And I try to keep both of my children really involved in that. Mental health wise, I think I'm very fortunate on this point, because I'm an avid runner, and for the past couple of years have been very involved in boxing training. So for me, that's something that I've always found a really good outlet. So I definitely rely on exercise as stress relief and just a general good way of living. So I found that incredibly helpful. I live in the countryside, so there's no shortage of hills to run up. So I've got no excuses, we have a lot of snow at the moment, even in the snow. So I tend to get my kids out on their bikes because they're too slow to run with me and I'm not waiting. And we all sort of go, and I'm like, right, you just keep up and then I'll run and I'll come back, and we all know where we're going. So I think that's definitely been something that I find makes a huge difference to my day, an absolutely huge difference, even if it's sort of at 2-3 o'clock in the afternoon when effectively homeschooling stops and it can be a bit of an overload. And I know I still have a certain amount of work to get through that will take me well into the evening. Then if we all go outside and run or sledge or whatever, then I find that moves everybody forward and we all come back in a much better, healthier, fresher place.
Absolutely. Yeah, no, I found that with the first lockdown, that the more routine you put in place, and, you know, with Polo and Tweed, with my own company, you know, most people were furloughed, you know, there was no set routine for me as the director, but actually doing that exercise every morning, going into my office, my home office, and, you know, doing work for the business gave me that mental stability myself. And I think that, like you say, with getting the kids into a good routine helps to get us through this bizarre time we're facing. So moving on, we're going to have a quick fire round quiz for you. You're not prepared for this, so you don't know what's happening. So I am going to ask you, I'm going to say 2 words, one or the other, and you can tell me your immediate reaction. You can pick one. You can give me a reason why, but don't think about it too much, okay? So for example, I might say cats or dogs, and you would say
dogs.
Dogs. There we go. Easy, you got it. All right, you ready?
Yes.
Okay. Morning or night?
Morning, definitely.
Netflix or party?
Party.
Cartier or Tiffany?
Oh, Cartier.
Fish or chips?
Chips, I think. Yes, probably, if I'm honest, yes.
Okay, Farrow and Ball or Little Green Company?
Oh, that depends on light. I can't answer that. That depends on light.
Okay, good answer. Brad or Angelina?
Oh, not my field of interest.
Okay. Rain or sun?
Sun.
Sea or swimming pool?
Oh, sea, definitely.
Fast or slow?
Fast, I would say.
Chanel or Gucci?
Gucci.
Sweet or savoury?
Savoury, definitely.
Eggs or bacon?
Oh, both.
Britney or Madonna?
Madonna.
Gold or silver?
Gold, most likely.
Today or tomorrow?
Today, always.
Nice, love that. Thank you for an unprepared quiz round.
That was a surprise.
So before we wrap things up, I wanted to sort of ask you, you know, what is it do you think that it takes to succeed in life, or what is it that you are enjoying about the journey of life?
Oh, gosh, to succeed in life, I would say ultimately self-belief, but that's probably also the hardest thing for most human beings to maintain anyway. I think I'm a big fan of that. The sort of moments of fear are wonderful learning opportunities, but perhaps it's taken me a certain level of maturity to be able to understand that, although I think I can apply that through most of my life. But yeah, I think success, learning and qualifications definitely, but self-belief, which is probably massively to do with the people that you surround yourself with. But that's what I would say is crucial. Yeah. That's what I try to instill in my children.
Yeah, totally. No, that's it. Very lovely, lovely statement to make. Well, I mean, Kay, thank you so much for your time today. It's been such a pleasure to speak with you. Now, for everyone listening who wants to check out Kay's incredible work, you can find her on Instagram. Her handle is kfb.interiors. She also has her website, kfbinteriors.com. So go on over, check out her work, send her a DM, you know, get chatting and engaging with her about any potential projects you have. But Kay, thank you once again. It's been such a pleasure to hear about your incredible career, and thank you.
Thank you, Lucy. Lovely to chat.
Thank you.